Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for today's webinar, More Insights, Tools, and Techniques for Writing Better Screeners. My name is Jennifer Audette and I am the Director of Marketing at L&E Research. Our guest speaker today is David Harris. David is the founder of Insight and Measurement, and he conducts qualitative and quantitative research as well as questionnaire design and screener development consultation and training. David is also the author of a great book. If you haven't read it already, I would suggest picking it up. It's called How to Write Better Questionnaires. How to get how to get better information for better decisions. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I turn it over to David. We are recording the webinar today, and we will send a link out to everybody afterwards, as well as a copy of David's presentation slides. And David is hopefully going to have some time at the end to answer some questions, and you can submit those through the GoToWebinar control panel at any time during the webinar or at the end. So I'll turn it over to you now, David. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, thank you very much, Jen. I appreciate it. As she introduced me, I run a company called Insight and Measurement. I wrote a book on questionnaire design. Just so everyone knows, I've been a generalist in terms of market research my entire life. I don't think of it as qual or quant. I think of it as we got to get insight and information to help our clients make better decisions. And so I've done as much qualitative work as quant work. Honestly, I wrote the book because as an industry, we have a lot of really good qualitative researchers. We also have a lot of really good statisticians and methodologists. We are not very good at writing questionnaires, so that's what inspired me to write this book. So we practice the science and art of questionnaire design. There's a lot of science to it. When you get it right, our questionnaires really should feel like conversations, and we partner with a lot of qualitative research firms to really make sure our clients get what they need. So on the surface, it looks like we're, really talking about screeners, but screeners are really just questionnaires and hopefully short questionnaires. And so in order for us to do a really good job writing screeners and making sure that we get the right people into our qual work, which is so critical, each respondent is enormously expensive and enormously influential in terms of how we think. We need to be trained really on the science and art of writing good questionnaires. So the problems with screeners, it's the same as the problems with questionnaires. I've reviewed thousands of these. A long time ago, I was at a company where we did 900 plus projects in a year. And I had some shared responsibility for a lot of those. And I also spend a lot of time working with people where they send me the previous work that they've done. And so, what I see is that and basically, a lot of you have been around. I'm sure a lot of you agree with this. Our screeners and our questionnaires, very often they're too long. We wear respondents out. The more times we ask questions that don't make any sense, we ask them too many things, the quality of the responses goes down. We ask questions that are unclear and biased, so we're not really screening for what we thought. We get artificially positive information where we thought people really cared about this, but turns out they don't. And a lot of our scales are biased. And then we have missing screening questions. And when I say I've learned things the hard way, trust me, I've learned them the hard way. I've been in the back of that group behind the one-way mirror, and they get tapped on the shoulder. We thought we were getting people who, felt this way about that, or how come three of them da-da-da. So, it's really important for us to get really the art and the science of writing screeners just right. Okay, what are our learning objectives? I'm going to try and get everybody out right by 2 because I know a lot of people have meetings. One, I want you to see writing screeners with new eyes. Just have a new perspective on really the art and the science of it and how important it is. There's a lot more to it than meets the eye. We'll talk about some key guidelines. What I think are really at the top, the biggest problems that I see in terms of writing better screeners, which translates perfectly also to writing better questionnaires. And then we're going to show you some experimental evidence that question wording and format make an enormous difference. We did some experimentation on how to write questions and how to format them. I think you'll find that really interesting. And let's have fun doing this and learn together. So I'm going to talk to you really about a framework for writing better screeners. And it starts really with planning research and planning the screener. This is enormously important. I call it the first half of the golf swing. This is the thinking, and this is the talking. It's before we write any screening questions. I'll go into that a little bit more. When we start writing questions, when I was writing my book, which was 2009 to 2013, I studied guidelines. Dillman's book has 184 guidelines on how to write questionnaires. But I found that they fall into 4 categories. It's about making questions clear, answerable, easy, and unbiased. I think that categorization helps a lot. And then, I don't know, I was driving somewhere and I realized, oh my gosh, you know, we really only ask respondents to do one of 3 tasks. We ask them to select from a list, we ask them to rate things on scales, and we ask them open-ended questions. So we have guidelines on that. And then the whole issue of properly pre-testing screeners, which I want to talk about first just to get that out of the way because it's critical to everything else. Properly pre-testing screeners. In questionnaire design, unfortunately, our industry, too much of pre-testing is simply what I call a soft launch. We send it out and it comes back with scratch marks. And that's not really pre-testing. Pre-testing is really when we sit down with people. You don't have to do this with a lot of people, and you have them tell you what each question meant to them. You have them think aloud. So the types of probes that you might use is you might say to the person, yeah, turn away from the computer. Can you, repeat what the question is in your own words? How did you come up with that answer to that question? And that's called a recall probe. Looks very familiar, right? So it's very similar to qualitative work because real pre-testing is qualitative in nature. What does the term priority choice mean to you? And you'll see that come up a little bit later. I have people, when I talk about pre-testing, sometimes they'll say, well, Dave, in the real world, we don't have time to do this. I've worked my entire life in the real world. And I believe me, I understand that. And so a lot of what can help a lot with screeners is doing a little in-office pre-testing. So if it's on diabetes and, somebody who has diabetes, or if it's something related to, some topic. I do a lot of work in healthcare, and very often we have somebody who was a nurse or a physician treating that particular condition. Go pre-test it with them. Sometimes 30 minutes can save you 2 weeks and a lot of headaches. So pre-testing is really, really critical. Also, from my perspective, I read pre-tests because they're cognitive interviews that are done by government research. So the census, they go out and they do thorough cognitive interviews of their questions. And so the more you read about those sorts of things, the better you get at it, at understanding how people can misinterpret a question or misinterpret what a concept really means. Okay. Screener planning and consulting. This is before we write questions in our screener. These are the rules. I call this screener hygiene. I have to say this. Really, so many of the screeners are way too long. The only questions that should go in a screener are those that are necessary to determine eligibility. Disqualify people early. We really shouldn't get to page 10. There shouldn't be 10 pages, by the way, but it shouldn't get to page 10, and then it asks if you go to McDonald's, and then it turns out they're just talking to people who go to McDonald's. I mean, by applying really good questionnaire writing and consulting skills, we can get most screeners down to 10 to 15 questions, and I do this all the time. So it's also really helpful to think in terms of, my gosh, would a homework exercise help? Maybe there's some information that would be very helpful to know going into the actual qualitative work. Well, maybe make that a homework exercise. And then there are also a number of questions that I'll hear clients, say, well, gosh, we really need to know this, and we really need to know this. Well, we're following this up with a quantitative survey. It should go there. And I also think it's important for us as qualitative researchers to be well-versed in quantitative research too, because we need to know what goes into that toolbox, or what that toolbox contains, and what should go in there, and what's really more appropriate for the qualitative exercise. So I think thinking about a homework exercise, screener, quantitative research, all those things are really helpful. In screener planning and consulting, before you write a question, this is, I try and get this concept across to people who write questionnaires too, and it's unbelievably important. Make the distinction between the information you need and how to write the question. And unfortunately, we live in a world where the market research industry has taught everybody that they're just as good at writing questions as we are, and that's really quite unfortunate. And that's why they're all jumping in and writing questions, as opposed to what information do we really need. And I find when I do this with people, they eventually get it and they appreciate it. So it's all about talking to the client about the information they need, not how to write questions. Usually they start jumping into question writing, and I'll tell them, look, pretend we're having coffee and I'm a respondent. How would you ask me that question? Oh, look, we're talking. And you wouldn't believe how different the questions are when people go to talking. I like to think of our good screeners, our good questionnaires as similar to how we talk. So here's just an example. Here's the question that got emailed to me. How would you rate the technical abilities of the person who serviced your computer? And when we turn the page over and I say, well, what do you really want to know? They say things like, what we want to know is how satisfied they were with the whole service process. Well, that's a very different question. And, if we just went with what they wrote as questions, we don't really get at that. So it's really important to get into, hey, let's talk, and how would you ask a respondent this if you were talking to him or her? I call it questionnaire design speak. There's a lot of bad habits in the industry where we see questions like this: what % of your most recent purchases of individually packaged food items are your priority choice? By the way, I've got like thousands of these, in my office, questionnaires that get sent to me, and, what is an individually packaged food item? And what's a respondent going to think about? If you were pre-testing this, you'd say, hey, what does that term mean to you? And what is priority choice? Does that mean what you like the most? Does that mean what you buy the most? Is that what you like or buy the most for yourself or for your family? It's important to talk and to not get into questionnaire design speak. I pulled this from a survey. In the past 30 days, how many times have you frequented a fast casual restaurant? From a screener. What does it mean to frequent? And what does it mean, a fast casual restaurant? And so I always tell people, do you talk that way? Do you call somebody up and say, hey, Bob, this weekend, do you want to go frequent a fast casual restaurant? I mean, no one talks that way. That sounds kind of creepy. So, and then clients say, have them rate on a scale of 1 to 10, and they start giving you the attributes. I'm just curious, do they mean a unipolar or bipolar scale? Well, this is what I call just bad questionnaire design habits, and unfortunately everybody thinks they can write them. So anyway, talk to people, get out of questionnaire design speak. Here's an example that really, I think, underscores this. So this comes from a questionnaire, and it's asking people, which of the following best describes your role in purchasing food for the family? And, it's food industry questionnaire, or I'm sorry, this came from a screener. And so let me look at this. Your role in purchasing food. So a respondent might think, well, I pay for it, I pick up food from restaurants. Gosh, when we go out to dinner, I don't know, I'm not sure what I drove. So, and here's another problem with this question, and it's the problem of everybody thinking they can write these things, is that there's a mismatch between the question stem and the answer choices. The question stem is asking for your role in purchasing food. The question stem is asking, are you the primary shopper for food? Well, that's a little different. So we went to the client and said, who actually do we want to be interviewing? And she said, oh, we just want to know who does most of the grocery shopping for the household. Well, why don't we ask it this way? Who does most of the grocery shopping for your household? You, someone else, you and someone else share equally. So the point is, talk to people, you get that figured out. By the way, food. So we asked, do you want to make sure who does most of the grocery shopping just for food items? No, it doesn't matter, you know, paper towels, dishwashing liquid, anything. So there you go, talking kind of helped there. I can tell you what I do, and it's a really good practice, is I do screener planning in consulting. Before this, but it's too much to put into this webinar, I usually write a paragraph that says, what's the tension that says, oh my gosh, we need to do this qualitative work. And then I'll write down key decisions. We will decide, declarative statements. We will decide which positioning concept to progress. We will decide how to improve the positioning concept. But what we do is we talk about the information needed, and then I make little notes. So when I talk to them, they go, oh yeah, we really want to find out if they like fresh tomatoes. Over there, I'm just making a note to myself, I wonder if they understand what the term fresh tomatoes means. Okay, just a little note. How often do they buy tomatoes from the grocery? And I'm thinking, well, a lot of people go to farmers markets, so I'm making a little note over there. And then attitudes towards organic foods. And I'm thinking, food, produce, you know, this is a produce company. Maybe we need to make that distinction. They want to know, you know, when they email me, or maybe we had a brief discussion, do they prepare meals at home at least twice a week? And I'm thinking, I'm wondering if it matters if it's the respondent who prepares the meal or somebody else in the family. But the point is just going through this and then having the discussion before we go into writing questions is enormously helpful. Okay, weeding out fake respondents, and this is because everybody wants to know a little bit about this. I like a trap question like this. Okay, in the past 3 years, have you vacationed on Clop Island, purchased a Campbellini vacuum cleaner? Well, none of these exist. So a person who's trying to squeeze their way in, I mean, I know they think they need to say yes to something. So set up a circumstance where, you know, they need to say, where you know the answer is no, and they're in a situation where in order to get in, they think they have to say yes to do that. I mean, you can do that by saying, hey, you know, I'm just you know, interested if you have pet insurance. And, you know, most people don't have that, but they might think they need to say yes. You can do other things, like you can ask people for something early in quant work. A lot of times we'll ask them for their age. At the end of the survey, we'll ask them for their birthday. You can ask them, I think particularly going to the next issue about rescreening about brands. Rescreening is enormously helpful. You can do that by phone. You can do that at the facility. I did a lot of work in skincare for a lot of years, and, you know, we just had too many people, too many would be like any, but people who came in and they really weren't quite the target. So, you know, we had someone call them up prior to it and talk a little bit about skincare and could pretty easily tell who was really, you know, in the game versus not. Okay. And then I think it's really important, I know it's really important to understand the science and art of questionnaire design for writing the screeners, because there are a lot of things. I mean, most of the enemy is not fake respondents. Most of the enemy is really rewrote questions that thought worked, but they actually didn't because they have bias in them and they're unclear. So we'll go into that. Okay. Learn enough about the science and art of questionnaire design, rid ourselves of some bad habits, become obsessive about concepts, making them clear and concrete, using the vocabulary of respondents, and we'll talk a little bit about forced choice exercise instead of agree-disagree scales. I'm going to really pick on those because those are probably the worst enemy in market research. They're enormously biased, and we see them all the time. I don't use them, but a lot of people do. Okay, so guidelines for writing questionnaires. This is just one of the chapters out of my book, and certainly what I practice in my company and in my discipline. So there's a lot of stuff here. I'm just going to talk about two. Make sure the question is really asking just one question, and make sure the question stem and the answer choices match each other. But there are other things as well. So let's look at a few examples. So here's a screener question. I routinely read labels for packaged food items to know the ingredients. I mean, I'm sure you know where this is going. You know, we really want to get people who read the labels and are, you know, really paying attention. So the problem with this question is it starts with, it's two things. I routinely read the labels for packaged food items. To know the ingredients is a different thing. I can routinely read the labels to know the calories or to know something else, not necessarily to know the ingredients. So it's really asking two things. My company cares about employee education and development. Education and development are two things. Company cares. I wonder what they mean there. I always go back to the client. Are you interested in how they feel about the company or your department? Sometimes they'll say, oh my gosh, yeah, really we want to know about this department. I am concerned about my health, so I often take vitamins. Again, this is two different things. I'm concerned about my health, and I might often take vitamins, but those two things might not be related. So I see a lot of questionnaires where they have these things that are smacked together. They're two separate questions. Are you concerned about your health, or how concerned are you about your health? And how frequently do you take vitamins? They're two separate things. And when they're smashed together, you really get mush. So a lot of times you get people who aren't really quite who you wanted. And trust me, I know I've been there, been tapped on the shoulder by many a product director. Okay. How many times have you talked to a doctor in the past 12 months? This actually comes from Gordon Willis's book on cognitive interviewing. And I think it's really interesting because if you pre-tested this, a person might say, you know, I go to the doctor, I've probably been to a doctor, you know, I don't know, 2 or 3 times this year. We take our kids to the pediatrician. Do you want me to count that? And then, you know, I see a chiropractor about once a month. Probably see my chiropractor maybe 10 times this year. So I'm not really sure what you mean. And so there are concepts here like you talk to. Does this mean I talk to the doctor about me, or I talk to a doctor about someone in my family? People will also struggle with this because they'll say, you know what, I called in one time because I needed to have my dose adjust for my migraine. And somebody talked to the doctor and then got back to me and told me to, you know, take 1.5 pills or something like that. Is that it? So, and then there's the concept of doctor, which, you know, the person's wondering what you mean. Does a chiropractor count? And, you know, we have linguists talk about it. We have things called conversational norms, which is people assume intent. So you notice the respondent, as he's thinking about this question, is wondering what you really mean. So they're always doing this in your screeners. They're wondering what you're really asking about. And I always say, because we evolved to talk, the vast majority of communication is, you know, face-to-face. And, you know, we didn't evolve to answer surveys. And so a lot of those conversational norms, which are, you know, designed in us, are still at, you know, happening. So it's a lot more challenging than meets the eye. The question, answer, response, people are going to go through the process of comprehending. What are they really asking? I wonder if this question's related to the previous one. Retrieval, they're searching their memory. What happened in the past 12 months? Was that really 12 months ago? Judgment, what information is relevant? You see that? Is the chiropractor relevant? Is a call in to get the migraine medicine adjusted? And then response, converting it to the format that the question's asking about. We'll see that a lot in scaling, where you ask a question and the person is asked to agree or disagree with it. This, one of my favorite examples, I was in Chicago and we were basically interviewing doctors who treat blepharospasm. And so that's a spasm in the eye, and we were talking to ophthalmologists who treat blepharospasm. And so I think it was our second and our third interviewer, you know, we went back and they really weren't treating blepharospasm. We went back and the question was fine. About how many patients do you treat blepharospasm? And they each said between like 5 and 10. Well, it turns out when you treat blepharospasm, we were looking for the people who inject the drug to treat it. And the way it works in these offices is that, you know, a doctor, an ophthalmologist, will write an order to get the patient injected. And so from his or her perspective, I treat blepharospasm, I wrote an order for them to get injected. And every other week, they have an injection specialist come in and do the injection. So we wanted to talk to the injectors. So the better way to ask that question would be in a typical month about how many patients do you inject for blepharospasm. So it's the concept, treat versus inject. Those are different concepts. And this is why we have to be really obsessive about this. But actually, that's not good enough. In a typical month, about how many patients do you yourself inject for blepharospasm? And then you get what you want. We made that switch, and you know, that improved things. But it just goes to show how easy it is to have a term or a concept that means one thing to the respondent and another thing to us. Okay, scaling. Before I talk a little bit about scaling, I want to say something about bipolar and unipolar scales, because people ask me, how long should a scale be? You know, and my first question is, are you talking about a bipolar or unipolar scale? A bipolar scale is where you measure both ends of the spectrum. So here's a bipolar, satisfied and dissatisfied, very dissatisfied to very satisfied. Let me show you that in a unipolar sense. A unipolar scale would just have the satisfaction part, not at all satisfied to extremely satisfied. You know, generally speaking, bipolar scales are a little bit better. You know, like if you're United Airlines and you want to ask about your flight experience, you might need to include the dissatisfied. But unipolar scales, you know, tend to be biased because you're not allowing people to go to the dissatisfaction side of the scale. It's not really always that simple because there's some scales that I don't think have a clear opposite end of the spectrum. So if I'm asking you, how interested are you learning, or are you about learning about polar bears? So that's an interest scale. You're either not interested or you're really interested in it. It's probably a little awkward to say, oh, I'm extremely disinterested in learning about polar bears. But anyway, that's bipolar and unipolar scales. And there is essentially the midpoint. But I want to point out, it's not really the midpoint. It's not the same thing, because neither satisfied nor dissatisfied is different from not at all satisfied. Neither satisfied nor dissatisfied is where a lot of people park themselves when they really don't want to answer your question or they don't want to do too much work. It can be a little bit of a problem. Okay. So here's the experimentation that I think you'll find really interesting. I certainly did. I was fortunate enough to be able to partner with MarketCube, a recruiting agency out of South Carolina, Charleston. They actually approached me. The Quirks conference was coming up and said, you know, let's partner and do some work. So what we did was we did experimentation on question wording and format. We randomly assigned 1,200 people to see a question worded one of three ways, or a question format in one of three ways. And this is really how we learn how a lot of questions function. Okay. And I just want to thank MarketCube for doing that, because it's all about making the respondent experience really pleasant and good, because, you know, we can't overfish this precious respondent pool. in our quant work or in our qual work, and it really helps us get better information for our clients. So here's the first experiment I'm going to show you. This, you might see this in a like in a segmentation study or something. So the question is, I always look for the lowest priced option when I shop. And here, you know, we randomly assigned 1,200 people. 400 people saw this item in an agree-disagree scale. 400 saw it in a how well does each statement describe you scale. And another 400 saw it in a forced choice exercise. So let's look at the results and see what we found. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the agree-disagree scale. So when we ask people, how much do you agree or disagree with the statement, I always look for the lowest price option when I shop. People load up on the agree side, right? And I'm going to I think I mentioned this earlier, there have been over 100 peer review studies done over the past 30 years that have shown that agree-disagree scales have an enormous positive bias. People don't want to disagree with something. So I figured we would see this. Now, what happens when we ask the same question, but we say, how well or not well do each of the following statements describe you? You can see that we get a different distribution on that scale. I tend to use this format instead of agree-disagree, and I also use forced choice. So next, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the agree-disagree versus a forced choice exercise. But you can see that how well do the following statements describe you. Not only does it give you a little bit better distribution, but I think it's a better question because I'm asking about you. Hey, I'm curious, how well does the statement describe you? Versus a problem with agree-disagree scales, which is, here's a statement. Now you have to convert your understanding of the statement to our agree-disagree scale, which is it's another step and it's a little more awkward. I rather just ask people, hey, how well does the statement describe you? Now let's look at agree-disagree. That's the same agree-disagree scale and the same question. But now we're comparing it to a forced choice exercise. And in the forced choice exercise, which is in green, we just simply say below are pairs of statements that may or may not describe you. Please indicate how much better one statement describes you compared to the other statement. And on the right, we have, I always look for the lowest price option when I shop, which is what we had before. And on the left, it says I'd rather pay more for quality. And so now you start to see how many more people are jumping over to that other statement. I would rather pay more for quality. And these are essentially a little bit different tasks, but they're the forced choice exercise is teasing something else out. And it really is a better measure of where people stand on something. And so I use this a lot, particularly in segmentation studies where you're trying to figure out where people stand. And as you do enough of these, how well does the statement describe you? And then the forced choice, that can help a ton. In screeners, it's enormously helpful because when somebody thinks they've got to game the system, they know, believe me, a lot of people know how the agree-disagree thing works and they're going to agree with everything. They don't know what you're really looking for here on this forced choice. So I really like forced choice in screeners. So bottom line, and here's a great example, and pretend we're doing a screener and we want people who care about climate change, recycling, eat organic foods, whatever. So one of the options is how well does the statement describe you? And then the other is to have people make choices. And so look at the bottom right there. I worry about climate change versus I do not worry about climate change. I support recycling. I do not support recycling. Same thing about organic foods. I try to eat organic foods. I do not try. Which one describes you better? And there's no really game in the system. There's not a positive bias here, really. Of course, we randomize left to right, top to bottom, and all that. Much better for getting at what you really need. And I've actually, let me show you another way of doing this where you're really forcing a choice. This might look similar to what we call a max diff exercise, but this is in the area of voting. Which of the following are the two least important and the two most important issues for you in the upcoming election? Please select 2 items per column. Think how different this is from asking them, how important are each of the following issues? And everybody, oh, important, super important, super important, super important. Depending on what the topic is, this can be really helpful because people have to force themselves into most and least important. For attitudinal issues, that can be really helpful. Yeah, I have examples if where but they're probably proprietary, where companies have had a problem with people being in there and they thought something was important or they thought they liked something, and the scale said that, but they were still getting too many people where that really wasn't as important as they thought. And so we switched to this sort of an exercise in the screener and helped a lot. Okay, I have a few more examples of experiments. Here's a typical item that you might see. We want to get people in here who enjoy athletic activities. The problem with this is, I know I don't need to pretest this because I've done enough of that. I know I can hear a person right now saying, yeah, I had a hard time answering this because I hated sports growing up. I was really awkward. I couldn't do anything. In college, I learned to really enjoy sports, particularly basketball and football, so I'm not really sure what to say. So I gave you a 3. Or, there are 2 things going on in here. It's about participating and it's about watching. But then you could see an item here where we ask, I enjoy watching and participating in athletic activities. And the problem with that is that there are 2 items in this particular item. So that's a problem. It's double-barreled. And so the better way is to ask them separately, I enjoy watching athletic activities. I enjoy participating in athletic activities. So in developing a screener, I'm obviously talking with the client saying, which one do you want? Which one's more important and that sort of thing. And that can help a lot to figure that out. But let's test what happens or see what happens when we tested these 2 substandard ways of asking it to the better ways of asking it. Okay, in orange up here at the top was the first substandard way of asking it. I enjoy athletic activities. And you can see people, they give you numbers, and it's a pretty even distribution. But what happens when we asked another 400 people the question separately? I enjoy watching and I enjoy participating. So if you look at the dark green, which is watching, and compare that to the orange, it's a very different distribution. If you look at the light green compared to the orange, again, a very different distribution. And I've looked at the data, and there are a lot of people who are giving you a 1 on watching and a 4 on participating, or a 1 on participating and a 5 on watching. Those are very different questions for people. And so what happens when we ask items like I enjoy athletic activities that are they really contain 2 things, we're getting mushy responses. And so when you're doing the interviews or you set up the community or you're doing the focus group, you end up with people who they don't really enjoy athletic activities the way we thought. We wanted people who liked participating in them or something like that. I thought it was really interesting that a lot of the problems with the scale ended up on the extremes, on the far ends, the 1s and the 5s. They're very different. So here's the other substandard way of asking it, where we lump them together. I enjoy watching and participating. And you can see again that it's a pretty even distribution. And then we go down. This is what we saw before with the dark and the light green for watching and participating. And again, it's really on the ends of the scale where we're really missing it. Okay, here's an item. It's one of my favorite examples. It came from a screener. When shopping for food, I read labels for ingredients and calories and or fat. And I just have flashbacks to where I'm trying to fix this and find out what people mean, because it's triple barrel. And I can hear somebody telling me, Dave, we just don't want to be too academic about it. We just want a general idea of what people think. And that, there's a problem with that. We don't do that with legal documents. We don't tell the lawyer, we just want a general idea of who's going to own the intellectual property rights. No, we want to know exactly who owns the intellectual property rights, because I can see being in this group, and we wanted people who really cared about weight control, and we have people who are just looking for ingredients for some other sort of thing. So obviously, it's better to ask this separately. So here is where we ask it, where we have a triple-barreled. When shopping for food, I read the labels for ingredients and calories and/or fat, and you see people load up on the the top end of that scale. And when we ask it separately, about ingredients versus calories versus fat content, enormously different distributions, because each of those individual questions means something quite differently to people. And you can see where we really miss it. And if we ask that top question, invariably we end up interviewing people who really aren't who we wanted. So it's important to get those things quite specific. Here is a question that I thought was pretty interesting. We asked people whether they agreed or disagreed with the following statement: I support hydroponic growing of fruits and vegetables. And the reason why we ask that is I know that most people don't know what hydroponic growing of fruits and vegetables actually means. So what happens when you ask them that? You can see how people load up on neither agree nor disagree. We also asked another group the same question, but we allowed them to say don't know. So we just tacked on don't know over there on the side. And 9% of the people said don't know. I'm going to take these two charts and bring them to the next slide and show you something else. So that's what we saw. For that top group, which is in blue, we also asked them towards the end of the survey, do you know what the phrase hydroponic growing of fruits and vegetables means? And 43% said, no, I really don't. And so, when you're trying to get at knowledge in a screener, the idea of putting don't know off to the end, it doesn't really get you there. It's important to really ask them the question up front and screen people in to find out if they really know what that is. That idea of tacking don't know over there doesn't really work. And here's another little trick of the trade that I think is super helpful. We asked people in group A, B, and C essentially the same question. Do you plan to purchase any organic produce in the next 30 days? And we had 66% say yes and 34% say no. We asked group B the same question, but we put in not sure as an option. And notice almost 30% of the people said not sure. In the world of writing any kind of questions, it's important for everybody's answer choice to be available. And not sure is a very reasonable option. If I ask you guys, do you plan to travel by air in the next 30 days? Some of you are going to say not sure. And so don't force people into saying yes or into saying no, because that, just forces basically errored responses. I'm going to skip that because we're getting towards the end, and I said I would be done by 2. Just to wrap this all up, I hope that you see writing screeners with new eyes. It's really about talking to clients about the information they need, not how to write questions. That's enormously helpful. Using trap questions, forced choice, re-screening to make sure we get who we really want. And instead of agree-disagree scales, use how well and use some forced choice exercises. It's really important just to be obsessive about how people might interpret concepts. And in the end, your screeners will feel like conversations. It'll improve the quality of our qualitative research because we'll get the right people, have fewer errors. And honestly, this will save you time and money. So with that being said, we're ready for a little Q&A. And if you don't get to toss in a question or something, feel free to write any of us, write me, send me an email, call me, whatever, or some of the people at L&E, and we're more than happy to answer any questions. But I'll stay on the line for a little while and answer any questions that anyone has. Yes, we're going to be sharing the deck with the participants. Not only that, someone asked if we're going to be sharing the deck. We share the deck, plus we also, I should have said this in the beginning, we also share a recording. So if you have somebody you say, hey, Leo, listen to this, this might help you, they'll have the recording too. Oh, okay. Someone asked about thoughts about using open-ended questions to try and gauge true interest or consumption of a product. I think that's helpful. I think it's certainly helpful in rescreening. I think it's a good option, particularly if you disguise it and it's not really obvious what you're getting at. For me to give you a better answer, I'd have to know the situation, because sometimes that is enormously helpful and maybe the only way to get at it. So I hope that was a good enough answer. Oh, on average, about how much time does it take to meet with the business partners, clients, to the final sign off on a screener? If they're willing to give you the time and make decisions, honestly, this can happen in a day. It really should not take that long. I mean, I'll sit there and talk with people, get a draft, if they get back on the phone in the same day, we can often have that done, actually in the same day. But the problem. The problem is, they're not available. We need to get this other person in. So the more people, the more ad agencies, et cetera, the longer that takes. Here's a question. How do you feel about screening people out and then asking them one open-ended so they feel that they are not being rejected? Something like, I mean, I think it's really important to treat people with dignity and respect. So I think that's, probably a good idea to ask them something so that they don't feel rejected. I think it's also good not to take them through too lengthy a screener and then reject them. And that's why I think it's really, because then we start losing people. We start overfishing the precious respondent pool. So I think the more we keep it really clean and crisp up front, the more I think people won't mind being, turned away from the particular qualitative exercise. What about asking open-ended questions to find out if a person is articulate? Honestly, I think the best way to do that is by talking to them, because, a lot of times people can write something out, but they may not be that good, in a group of people. So if you can do that, if it's really important. I remember back when I was doing a lot of the work in skincare and we had a lot of attention on our product, we needed articulate people. We did that telephone rescreen where we had somebody who really knew skincare who would call people up, and she could tell in 5 minutes whether, they were the real deal and could be articulate. What are some of the tools that are available to accommodate these types of question structures and skip logic beyond SurveyMonkey? I'm probably not the right person to ask because I haven't done a full, review of all the different tools, but there are a lot of tools that really help. And even if you're just dealing with, paper and pencil that somebody's, might be even reading, you can do some things in terms of the format of it with arrows and colors to make it easier for someone to, administer that, over the phone if that's how they're doing that. But almost all those survey programs, have a good amount of skip logic. anybody, if I don't answer your question well enough, feel free to email me or call me or something. Ideally, how many questions should a screener consist of? 5 to 15. Virtually every screener I've ever done, we've gotten it down to that. Because what they really need is under 15 questions. Where it starts to get a little dicey and might get a little bit more is if somebody has a typing tool that has 12 questions in them. And then we need a few things outside of that. So it could get a little bit longer, but most screeners that I've seen could easily be cut in half. Okay, what is a good way to suggest to a client that this sort of careful consideration of question wording and structure really matters? They may not want to take the time. Thank you so much for asking that, because, you know, I was inside a company for many years, and, you know, I needed to get that kind of buy-in. I think what really helps is if you pitch it as helpful. So when you say, hey, I'm curious, do you want people who buy this just for themselves or for their family? Or, hey, do you want to include people who are buying tomatoes at the farmer's market? When they see you're adding value by, you know, asking about concepts and that sort of thing, I've found that 80% of the time, you know, they start to think, wow, you really know what you're doing. And then they start becoming, you know, obsessive about it too. I've worked with a lot of clients who've gone on to other companies where they said, man, I write all the screeners now because, you know, now they're so obsessive about it. I will tell you, you know, because like I said earlier, I've worked my entire life in the real world. There are those clients who are just going to say, nope, we want to ask AgreeDisagree scales, and we like these really, you know, horrible, unclear ways of asking it. And I always give people two options, you know, two chances to change that. But you can kind of tell when somebody just says, no, we want to do it. 80% of the time, pitch it as a benefit and it'll help. Somebody asked, how long do you typically take to do QA, and how many people do you use for this? I'm not sure what you mean by QA. This is Noel. So if you can just quickly tell me what you mean by QA, I'll go right back to that, okay? Because I can see questions coming in. Okay, typing tools with screeners. Thanks for asking that question. Well, you know, if they have a typing tool for their top 3 segments and they want to test an ad with their top 3 segments, it's really important to do that because you want to make sure you're talking to the top 3 segments and showing them the ad. The issue is, though, unfortunately, is that so often those typing tools are not well done because, you know, like I said, the majority of our industry just doesn't write questionnaires well at all. And so you end up with a battery of agree-disagree scales. You end up with a lot of unclear terms. It's too long. Respondents don't know what you're talking about. The recruiting agency gets really frustrated. So a good typing tool is wonderful. A bad one is pretty tough. Noel, I got your question. Quality assurance of the survey, or internally pre-testing. So I think the question is how many people do you usually use for this quality assurance, and maybe doing some pre-testing? How much time does it take? It depends on how important it is and how much time you have. So I've been in situations where, you know, oh my gosh, we got to get this into the field in 2 days. And all I was able to do is call up 1 or 2 people associated with the company and say, hey, I want to walk through this questionnaire with you. And I can tell you, you will find so many things to fix. That first 1 or 2 people is enormously important. If we were doing a segmentation study for a really big brand, I would certainly urge them, and I might even do this on the side. I a lot of times pre-test stuff. People think they don't have the time. They have the time. Because as we're designing it, we can be pre-testing it too. So, you know, you'd want to go to a few people per segment and really get it right. I do a decent not a decent amount of work. I do some work for the in healthcare and for the FDA. And the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, requires thorough pre-testing. So they might want, 5 or 6 per segment where you walk through the questionnaire, and then they want to see the transcripts. So it all depends on how important it is, but you can very easily pre-test a questionnaire, just on the side. I've grabbed neighbors and said, hey, come look at this thing, and had them turn away from the computer and tell me what they thought the question was asking. What's the difference between screening and segmenting? Well, screening is we're asking you some questions to see if we want to interview you for qualitative work. Segmentation, when I talk about segmentation, we'll have a qualitative component to that and a quantitative, and that is, are there different groups of people who respond differently to our value proposition? So like Allstate has a different campaign for men and for women. They have a different campaign for millennials. So they've segmented their market, which always starts with really good qual work. What are my thoughts about homework exercises? I love them. It allows you to get some good information from people ahead of time. And it also, I think, is super helpful if you want to get at something that's, in this semi-unconscious area. So, you could imagine doing work with people and saying, you know what, part of the homework exercise is I want you to pick out a picture that represents how you felt when you were first diagnosed. Or, pick out 3 pictures that represent how you feel about, Marriott or, American Airlines or whatever. So I think they're great. Do you factor in demographic questions in those 10 to 15 questions? Yes, whatever demographic stuff really matters. And so I think a lot of times what happens is age, gender, ethnicity, marital status, you start to run out eventually, but I do think that if you did have a typing tool and it's a big brand and you have your segments figured out, you might have a typing tool that is, 8, 10, 12 questions, and then you might have, 7 or 8 more, so it gets to be a little bit more. I mean, I certainly honor that. And then also, back to Dave, grew up in the real world, these are always negotiated things. I mean, there are plenty of times, like a lot of times, where, we're including things in the screener because they just want them there. And, it's not really worth it to talk them out of it. And I don't think it's going to hurt anything. Yeah, what are your thoughts about these algorithm screeners that many clients want to administer? I think I've kind of answered that, but feel free to contact me. I think when they're done right, boy, they're helpful because you need to test the new Allstate ad with the new segments. But when they're really a mess, because I see a lot of them that way, where I see it, the algorithm, and whoever did their segmentation work just did a bad job, particularly on writing the questionnaire. I can't argue with their analytics. Maybe those were great, or their sampling, but the way the questions were worded, that's a problem. And unfortunately, it's so hard for people to jump outside of that. So I talk with people all the time who say, man, you're right, Dave, but I can't really change that here at big Fortune 100 company X. So I have 2 more questions. Okay, for field recruiters who get handed long screeners, let's say they're 12 to 16 minutes, oh my gosh, I feel your pain. No, questionnaires shouldn't even be that long. What's your suggestion for feedback to the moderator, researcher, client who wrote the long script? I think if you can get them to realize that they're going to get a better recruit if they work on that and redo it, then you can redo it. I've seen too many of them where they dig their heels in, and this is just how we're going to do it. And so that's why, part of my hope is that I can help, change people's thinking about, how we write screeners and questionnaires. And so it can become a little bit more of a culture to, hey, let's get this down to something that makes sense to people. Let's make it a conversation, because we're going to end up with better recruits and we're going to save money in the long run. But I feel your pain there, because I've talked to a lot of those people where, they're not going to change. Here's another question. You said, I mentioned you recruit internally to test the survey. How many do you test and over how many days? It's whatever we have time to do. So, if we can, testing it internally is good. If it's a really important thing, I'll give you an example. We might test something. I did something, let's say it's on baby formula, and you're able to test that with a few people around the office, or it's something around diabetes, and you're able to test it, that's all you're able to do, then do that. That's going to help. If it's a really important study and you can get people to say, and you can get that done, in a day, you could get that done before lunch if people had time. If you had a super important study that really mattered to the company, I would schedule, I've done this where I've scheduled 2 days in a focus group facility or more, where, we pulled it, we had 2 different people pre-testing it, where we had to make sure that people understood the survey. And, then what is that? That's 2 days or a day and a half or something like that. You'll see that the closer you get to like FDA work, label comprehension studies, where they want to make sure people understand the label, that's really required. I see it a little bit more in healthcare, where, they want to make sure people get it right. It should be more common just about everywhere. So it shouldn't take more than a couple of days at most. Oh, somebody asked, what do you mean about typing tool? I should have said that early on. I remember when I wondered what people were talking about. What happens is that when people do, their qual and their quant segmentation study, part of what will come out of that from the analytical people is it's a spreadsheet usually, and it's some questions that put you in the the different segments. So it might be the segment that buys vacations for families, the segments that buys vacations for singles, or something like that. So it'll be, roughly 10 questions that are attitudinal in nature, some demographic stuff that puts you in a segment. So the person doing the recruiting has that spreadsheet, and as you answer the question, they're putting it in and they're finding out, yep, you're in segment A, or you're in segment B, or you're in segment C. So that's all the questions. I want to thank everybody, and please feel free to reach out if you have any more questions, if I didn't answer. And here's one more question. When you say 5 to 15 questions, does that include demographics? Very often it does. 5 may sound low, but there are situations where somebody only needs 5 or 6 questions in order to do the interview. If you want to drift that number up to, 18, 20, because, for whatever reason, there are a few more demographic questions. The point is that if you don't use it for screening, you can always ask it in a homework assignment, or it can be used elsewhere. I just think most of these screeners can be reduced probably by 30%, maybe half. All right. Jen, do you want to say anything else?
Thanks so much, David. That was awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we will be sending out the recording to today's webinar and David's presentation hopefully later this afternoon. And we'll also send out David's contact info in case anybody has any questions that they want to follow up with him on. So thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Okay, bye-bye.